Hey everybody, what's going on? Thanks so much for joining today's talk with Dr. Mercola. I was really excited for this interview, obviously, because it's Dr. Mercola. He's a big name and all that kind of stuff. And we touched on ozone therapy and how it mitigates the chronic oxidative stress cycle. Oxidative stress, if you don't know, is primarily one of the leading causes of aging and deterioration and disease on top of that. So we talked about how ozone therapy works at that, but we took a much more important look at what is the fundamental cause of oxidative stress? Because it's like filling up a bucket with a bunch of holes in it if we're just doing ozone therapy. So we talked about iron levels, we talked about seed oils, we talked about sunlight, and what really is at the core of the chronic oxidative stress cycle that causes aging. Take a look. Hey, Dr. McCullough, thanks for joining so much. I appreciate to have you. Super thankful for your time to be even able to do this. You know, you're a big name out there and you've helped millions of people. When we've been at conferences together, I see doctors coming up to you saying, like, thank you, you changed my career. Now I'm actually helping people with natural medicine. But over the years, you have a really broad base of knowledge and a lot of depth too. Like in certain subjects, at first I thought he's kind of an article writer, but when I met you in person, I was like, no, he actually understands a lot of this stuff very well. He gets down into the biochemistry. He vets things to make sure they're good. But you've become interested in ozone therapy. I'm not sure how long it's been, but we first talked maybe 5 years ago, and it seems like that's a growing interest of yours. What about ozone therapy attracted you, and why are you interested in it?
Great question. Yeah, I love pushing the edge, so to speak, and finding the best strategies to optimize one's health and increase the likelihood that you'll be around here on the planet a bit longer, but not only longer, but in high quality health, and enjoying it just as much as you did when you were much, much younger. So there are some very smart people I know of that have been attracted to ozone and have spent decades and many decades, multi-decades, using this and exploring it. So, and people I really respect. So they since vetted it for me, and I knew there was something there that I just had to explore. And after reviewing it, I was convinced it was a profoundly useful intervention that I need to have access to, specifically when it comes to infectious disease. I think Rob Rowan, I've interviewed him a few times and was very impressed with his interventions to take that over to Africa and actually treat Ebola, which is a far more serious, deadly pathogen than COVID ever was. And he was getting 100% success rates over there. And of course, it was the politics that got him knocked out of the country, but nevertheless, he demonstrated the efficacy. And I think it's a really powerful intervention to use on a regular basis to optimize your health with a wide variety of implications. And I've also become more recently interested in some more advanced therapeutics for longevity, such as a very specific type of stem cells that are taken from your body. They're autologous, drawn from your blood supply, so you don't have to go and do a bone marrow aspiration or fat biopsy. And in the process of doing these, I learned that pre-treatment with ozone was a really profoundly important intervention. And it turns out, after exploring this, that there's, well, as you well know, and many people watching this know, there's a wide variety of applications that one can administer ozone under. Mm-hmm. And this consultant that I was working with is actually enlightened me to a relatively new one called EBOO, which is extracorporeal blood, ozone, and oxygen therapy. I know that's a mouthful. That's why it's so much easier to say EBOO. Yeah. So this EBOO is sort of like the cat's meow when it comes to preparing the body for really an ideal environment to accepting these autologous stem cells. And it's usually done a day or two, maybe 3 days before. And it sets the body up to getting a good result for them. So as a result of that, started exploring it. It turns out there's only like maybe 10 or less different centers in the United States that offer this. And almost all those centers kind of put the machine together themselves. There was no real commercial opportunity to purchase a prepackaged unit with guidance and expertise and training. So interestingly, I reached out to your brother, Tim, and actually your father first, and then secondarily through Tim, and some strong arm twisting, was able to convince him that this would be really good to provide to the ozone community, because it seems that, especially since we had the discussion, there's been an emerging consensus within the ozone community. And I don't consider myself part of that community because I'm not a practicing physician. I basically retired from seeing patients 15 years ago. So if I did have a clinic, I would be using this. I can 100% assure you, but I just don't have a clinic. So, but the emergency consensus is the clinicians out there is that this seems to be the best form of ozone administration. It's the top of the peak, and it's really not much more expensive to administer at all. A bit more logistically challenging because you actually have to place a relatively large size catheter, like an 18 gauge catheter, in each arm, and many people will not have the vascular access to make that available to them. So maybe 10, 20, 30% of people won't be able to do that. But for those who can, it seems to be the best way to go. So I'm really excited about this providing not only an ideal optimal form of ozone therapy, but really an important component of the protocol for this anti-aging strategy that I've become particularly fond of. So it's EBU, and it's really exciting. I guess these the units are going to be available very shortly. I think pre-orders available on your brother's site, and I suspect you can put a link to that in there. But I'm really, really excited that your brother listened and went forward, and your father and your brother listened, and they actually are going to be providing these units. And I think it's going to help everyone. It's a triple win. And the triple wins aren't that common. It's going to not only help the patients, it'll help your company, and it'll just help the whole community. We need access to this. I mean, it's such a useful intervention. So hopefully that answers your question. But one of the other things I want to focus on in this interview was, ozone is great. There's a lot of things that are phenomenal, but unless you really have a profoundly effective understanding of what the big picture is with respect to what you're doing with your lifestyle, your choices, the exercises you're engaging in, the food you're choosing to eat, the light exposures you have or don't have, your sleep cycles, that you are going to be setting yourself up for an unmitigated failure if just thinking that these interventions are a magic bullet. They are not. They are very useful and can be life-saving or life-transforming, certainly, but they're going to work much better when you are integrating them with these lifestyle changes. So I can start talking about some of them if that's okay with you.
Yeah, I mean, I want to get into it. I think one of my big questions about ozone therapy is, there's so many different modalities, and we're specifically talking on optimization, anti-aging. Sounds like obviously a ton of applications in dental, beauty care, chronic disease, those kinds of things. But contextually speaking, I mean, we have so many different therapies we can choose from. I mean, you hit on stem cells, you hit on PRP. Where do you kind of fit in your mind ozone therapy and where it belongs in that sphere, and maybe some corollary therapies that are great adjunctives to that?
I don't know that I've ranked them in my mind. I think it's a useful one. I don't know that it's as effective as some of these others. I think the two most profoundly effective interventions based on objective third-party data, which would be DNA methylation, or what appears to be, for most of the scientists in the field and researchers, the best way to assess aging, biological aging, is a term called DNA methylation, or that is these little methyl groups. It's one carbon and 3 hydrogens that are attached to certain sections of your DNA that prevent the DNA from expressing itself. So the more of these methyl groups you have attached, the older you tend to be. And there's a pretty strong correlation between chronological and biological ages, but there are certain interventions you can do that actually turn back, remove the methyl groups non-specifically, and give your body the appearance of functioning at an earlier age. So based on these clocks, the two most effective ones are a very specific type of stem cell use called V cells, which is short, it's an acronym for very small embryonic-like stem cells that are pluripotent and extracted from the peripheral blood. And then the other one would be something that is actually more difficult to get, but a little less expensive. It's plasmapheresis or apheresis, which is similar to EBU in many ways. And EBU, what I'd like to mention about EBU is that there's a filter involved, but the filter, it's just a filter in name only. It really isn't functioning as a filter. So it's not like removing things from your blood. The only purpose of the filter is to increase the broad surface area of the blood as it's coming in contact with the ozone gas, so that essentially you can saturate enormous quantities of the blood very effectively. So, but in plasmapheresis, it is a filter. Now it does the filtration through a mechanism it's not an actual mechanical filter, it's filtering it by spinning it in a centrifuge. And by spinning it, then you can separate out the different constituents of the blood and remove them from the body. So very powerful intervention. So these two tools, according to probably one of the best companies in DNA methylation age, which is True Diagnostics. And Ryan Smith is the founder of that company. And I talked to him at one of the biohacking events, and he told me privately that these were the two most effective interventions at turning back the biological aging clock. So that I was already doing the V cells with the EBU, but plasmapheresis is something that's a new intervention that I'm going to be incorporating. So I think those are the two best, and any of the other ones, as I said, the EBU is done in conjunction with the V cells ideally. So, but I don't know how effective it is by itself. I mean, in my view, it's a way to optimize your antioxidant exposure because it causes your body to make these antioxidants itself, just exposing it to them. So as opposed to swallowing antioxidants, although I'm particularly fond of a non-specific but highly selective antioxidant called molecular hydrogen, which ideally is administered as a gas, but those are a lot more expensive. You can take them as tablets, but essentially the hydrogen gas, once you consume it, functions to go in and potentially increase your body's production, its own internal endogenous production of the antioxidants like glutathione reductase, glutathione itself, peroxidase, and superoxide dismutase and catalase, and a whole wide variety of other powerful and important antioxidants that your body only produces only if it perceives through its sensors an increased amount of oxidative stress, and then they'll produce it. But if it's not there, it's not going to non-specifically increase those. So because you can run into problems by taking large amounts of antioxidants to non-specifically suppress oxidative stress, because some oxidative stress is good. We need some free radicals. They're important signaling molecules. And if you non-specifically reduce them, then you could run into problems, some unintended consequences, which is so common when people try to optimize health. I mean, it's in common when in traditional medicine where they're using drugs and they have no idea what they're doing, but it's also certainly rampant in natural medicine.
So what would be some of those complications that people are running into that you would typically see?
Taking non-specific antioxidants? I think, I don't know if there's any specific diseases, but just generally it's going to be a decreased health, because you need these free radicals to help your body signal the productions of so many different pathways. And if you're not specifically reducing, I think probably the most common side effect would be fatigue, because you're going to generally reduce the efficiency of mitochondrial energy production in the form of ATP. So that the levels will tend to go down. When your ATP levels drop, then you're not going to have as much energy as you should. So that would probably be the biggest one, but there's a whole wide variety of other complications and side effects that can result from that.
Yeah, and you mentioned DNA methylation, which is like an indicator of longevity, correct?
Indication, it's pretty profoundly important indication of how biologically old you are, as opposed to chronologically.
So would we be able to do this EBU ozone therapy, do a test before and a test after, say 5-6 years? A pretty good indicator.
Yeah. It's not like you do it and then you take a blood draw afterwards. It usually takes a few weeks for the results to impact the methylation of your DNA. So you could. You could. That could be definitely a study, and I'm sure Ryan would be able to facilitate that. I don't suspect it would have a huge benefit, though. It might have some. It's not going to be as profound as the plasmapheresis, that's for sure. Because it's not, it's just as far as I understand the mechanism, and I am in no way an expert on ozone therapy. I mean, I'm a relative newbie to it, and I understand it generally. I've attended a few courses and read on it, but my basic understanding is it's just going to, the primary benefit is, from respect to aging, is increasing the antioxidant capacity of your body. And I don't see that by itself providing a profound anti-aging benefit. I could be mistaken.
Yeah. Well, I think the reduction of chronic oxidative stress as you get older is something that can definitely help with, and just mitigating that harmful cycle of you're getting too much oxidative stress and then your body kind of balances out. But as you get older, it gets out of whack. So ozone therapy.
Here's the issue. The issue is you're treating the symptoms. You want to treat the cause, which is the classic mistake that conventional medicine does. So yes, you can do that with ozone, but it makes, and that's a great lead into the 2 points I wanted to mention, which was increasing, because it is all about oxidative stress. I couldn't agree with you more. I'm fairly convinced that the mitochondrial theory of aging is probably pretty darn accurate. So in other words, and it's related to Denham Hardham, I think in 1956 first promoted that. Actually, it was a free radical theory of aging, which was revised, I think, in the 80s to focus on the mitochondria. So, but basically, you're right. Increased oxidative stress, I think, is the primary issue, but non-specifically reducing it is not the ideal way. The ideal way is to address the foundational cause. So what causes oxidative stress in your body? The most common source, that is the question on the table. That is the primary question on the table. And I think I have an understanding finally, after trying to comprehend this for 3 decades. What's your best guess as to what's the most common cause?
Oh, I wouldn't be a good person to answer this.
All right.
Going back to lifestyle, right? Everything is based on lifestyle. So when we're looking at kind of our environment, how we're interacting with the world, the kind of foods that we're putting into our mouth. I mean, all those things, that it seems complicated, but health in a sense is simple. And in the sense, I always go back and think about a farmer who's working the land. He's eating healthy. He's drinking the good water.
Well, eating ostensibly healthy. Most of them aren't.
Yeah, well, in my mind, that's who I'm picturing.
Maybe 150 years ago that was true, but not now.
Yeah. So in my mind, that's kind of that's the basis of oxidative stress, right? Our environments have become
but let me get specific. The devil's in the details. So you're totally spot on. I couldn't agree with you more. Ultimately, when you understand this at this foundational basis, it is very, very simple. This is not complex rocket science. So I've concluded that there's 2 primary reasons that contribute to almost all the oxidative stress we have in our body, the excess oxidative stress, because we need some, remember. Free radical signaling is crucial to survival on this planet. We need it. It's just the excess oxidative stress that's the problem. So where does it come from? It comes from 2 primary things. One is too much iron in your body. If you're a male over 15 or 16 or 12, you probably have too much iron and you need to get rid of it. Why? Iron is a very reactive molecule, and it combines when it's oxidized forms, especially as you increase it, and more accumulates the older you get. And a big portion of the reason we've had this too is the introduction of literally iron filings to many foods in the attempt to treat iron deficiency anemia, which is a big hoax, and most people don't have iron deficiency anemia. So iron is almost a poisonous supplement and should rarely be taken. I mean, there are cases where you have iron deficiency from blood loss, acute blood loss, and that may be one of the few indications. But other than that, you just want to stay away from iron. So you got to get your body levels low. And before I jump into the next one, which is the biggest one that some of the brightest minds in natural medicine fail to get this, and it just shocks me. I know you have another guest on your event, Dave Asprey, and he is not one of the guys that missed this. He got it in spades, and he understands it really well. He's one of the few guys that do. So, but let's finish up on the iron. The iron, if you're a man or if you're certainly a postmenopausal woman, you really want to donate your blood on a regular basis. Now, I do a mini donation. I get like 8 to 10 tubes of blood drawn every month because I'm obsessive compulsive and doing analytics on my blood chemistry. So I get a mini phlebotomy done every 4 weeks. And that's been able to keep my iron levels really low. And for me, that's particularly important because I have a genetic hemolytic anemia called thalassemia, where my red blood cells have a very short half-life of 2 months instead of the normal 3. So as a result of this high turnover, there's a massive increase in iron in the blood. And my dad died. I diagnosed him with this 30 years ago, and he wound up getting another 20 years before he passed away a few years ago. And but he was almost on his deathbed. He had ferritin levels of over 1,000, so it was really bad shape. But the treatment is not to take an iron chelator, but to remove the blood from your body, because the blood is where most of the iron is stored. Huge, big pearl for almost everyone listening to this. And if you haven't heard about it, there's a lot of good information out there. People have written books on it, and this is a big deal. Maybe one of the biggest deals is going to increase oxidative stress. Yeah. But the reason high iron levels cause a problem is because they interact with molecules in your body that you're by putting them in there unintentionally. And through a variety of reasons. One could be the propaganda that just like we've been fed massive propaganda about COVID-19, and anyone who's not in the mass formation and been hypnotized and brainwashed by the media will understand it. It becomes so obvious, so clear. Almost everything the mainstream media is telling you is just a reinforcement of these lies to support their narrative. And in many ways, it mimics what's been going on for decades, since the 1950s, when we've had this whole massive shift, primarily as a result of the work of Ansel Keys, who got us on this low-fat approach. And interestingly, in some ways, the low-fat diet is good, but he was vilifying saturated fat, which was the exact wrong fat to vilify. Saturated fat is actually incredibly healthy for you. It's what your body needs and desires and requires to stay healthy. But instead of using natural saturated fat, in many cases from animal products, but you could get it from plant products too. The recommendation was to use these polyunsaturated fatty acids, PUFAs, which are also known as vegetable oils, but more accurately entitled or called seed oils. And these seed oils and vegetable oils are really high in what's called an essential fat, the omega-6 family, which is similar to omega-3, which is from marine oils. But the omega-6s really should not be considered. I believe it's a mistake to call them essential fats, because it looks like if we don't get enough, we're going to run into problems. It is physically impossible to eat almost any food and not get omega-6. It's in all foods, just about. Now, there are some highly processed foods it's not going to be in, but if you're eating food, you're going to get omega-6. You just cannot avoid it. So it's like you'll never get a deficiency of omega-6. So some people make the mistake. You never need to take an omega-6 supplement. They're on the market. I don't know if you know that. They are. You can buy omega-6 supplements.
Yeah. And I remember hearing a number of years ago that it was about the ratio of omega-6 to 3.
Yeah. And there's still some science to that, but there's a fairly strong argument that even omega-3s may not be as healthy as we thought they were. And why is that? We're getting back to the oxidative stress. It's because the omega refers to the position in the molecule where there's an unsaturated double bond. And because it's unsaturated, it's highly susceptible to damage through either oxygen in the environment, pressure, heat, or sunlight. They can all damage those bonds. And when it's damaged, that can degenerate into a wide variety of metabolic byproducts that are very, very toxic to almost all cells. And it could damage not only your stem cells, but your DNA, your cell membranes, your proteins, your mitochondria. So, and these fats that are so susceptible to damage, which in total contrast to saturated fat. Saturated fat has no double bonds. It's called saturated because all the bonds are saturated with hydrogen. You cannot damage it. That's why you can eat them. They're so much safer to consume and integrate into your cell membranes. What most people, including clinicians, fail to understand that these seed oils are so toxic because once you consume them, they get integrated into your cell membranes and tissues in your body. And they stay there for not a few hours, not weeks, not months, but years. It literally takes you 7 years to get them out of your body. So that's why I think they're exponentially worse than having a lot of sugar. Now, high fructose corn syrup, I'm not a fan of. It causes a lot of problems, and I don't think you should eat that. And one of the ones, and there's been Dr. Perlmutter just wrote a book on this, and I read the book and he didn't have it in there. But one of the reasons it's such a problem is sort of a minor tangent, but it actually negatively impairs a protein that is responsible for improving copper, and copper deficiency is almost as bad as iron excess. They kind of go hand in hand. If you have low copper, you're going to have problems with iron toxicity. So it's another thing that we could talk about too. But essentially, the high fructose corn syrup or carbohydrates in general, people are concerned about them. There's a lot of people on keto diets and low carb diets, and that can be very useful, especially if you're overweight. But ultimately, high sugar, even high fructose corn syrup, is only going to temporarily raise your blood sugar and increase insulin resistance. But essentially, it's over in hours. The seed oils, once you consume them, it's bad news for 7 years, and it's going to take you that long to get them out of your body. So that's why, especially, this is a common concern. People actually, I'm a big fan of sun exposure. That's something I want to talk about too, as another strategy for lifestyle, because it's much more than vitamin D. So, but when you get sun exposure, people are concerned about skin cancer. Certainly the dermatologists have been concerned about it, right? And they warn the general population and essentially call out misinformation or fake news, anyone that says being in the sun is useful for it. And they warn everyone to stay out of the sun. Well, the reason why excess sun causes damage is because people are eating seed oils. And I'll go into the quantity they're eating in a moment. But they're eating seed oils, they get integrated in your skin, and this ultraviolet light from the skin damages, it busts those double bonds, and it causes these oxidation byproducts, which cause tremendous cellular damage and can and do lead to cancer, no question. So the sun is a catalyst, it's sort of the spark, but it's not the reason. It is not the reason people are getting these skin cancer. It's because the seed oils are eating. So how much seed oils are people eating? This is important to know, because prior to 150 years ago, I think the 1860s, 1870s, when they first, Western civilization acquired the skill set to mass produce and refine these oils in large quantities. Oleic acid, which is the primary omega-6 fat, our percentage of LA, which is short for linoleic acid, is only about 1 to 2% of our total daily calories. 1 to 2%. That's important to know and understand, because now that number has increased to 20 to 30% of our total daily calories. 20 to 30%. And when you get beyond 3 or 4%, you've got a problem. See, this is the reason, Micah, why we need to have all these strategies to mitigate oxidative stress, because we have pushed the pedal to the metal in providing the substrates so that our environment can radically can produce these toxic molecules that require our body to produce the antidote. So wouldn't it be far wiser to reduce the need for these molecules by reducing the fundamental reason why most of us have oxidative stress, which is A, too much iron, and B, way too much PUFAs in our diet. And everyone watching this, and I suspect even you, almost everyone watching this, is having way too many in their diet. You almost can't have too low omega-6 fat. I try to get the mine as low as possible, and there's an interesting app called Chronometer, CRONOMETER.com, that you can use for free on the desktop. And you can enter very accurately with the kitchen digital scale your foods, and then you will find out within 1/10 of a gram precisely how much omega-6 fat you have in your diet. And it will shock you. And you can even go over that, put your mouse over that field where it tells you the quantity, how many grams you have, and it will rank source the amount, the foods that you inputted that day, and tell you how many grams in each of those foods, so you can see what is the biggest offender, and you can start working on. Because even healthy foods, like I have almost 1/2 pound of butter a day, but I'm getting a few grams of omega-6 fat. As I said earlier, you cannot, even in the healthiest foods, you're going to get omega-6 fat. And it's not like you shouldn't have it. You need some, but you need it in like way less than 10 grams. And the average person, you need less than 10 grams. I think optimal is probably 6 or 7 grams for most people, maybe even a little bit lower. Guess how much omega-6 fat the average person is consuming every day in this country? Take a guess.
40 to 70.
Yeah, it's actually 80.
Okay.
80 grams.
Yeah.
So, I mean, and so where are the biggest sources? The biggest sources are in processed foods, because anything, obviously any vegetable oil, corn, safflower, corn, canola, you don't want any of these things. So if you have these oils in your house, you just want to breathe, close your eyes, and reflect on a neighbor or a relative that you don't like, and then give them those oils. Because it's bad news. And, I mean, ideally, obviously that's just sarcasm, but the intention would be most of the neighbors that you don't like they're not going to understand this, and you're not going to be able to convince them, just like you can't convince them out of the COVID narrative. So, rather than throwing it away, you give it to them, they're going to use it, and they're going to use it anyway, so it's not a big deal. But you should not have any of these oils, but it's also in processed food. So that means almost any restaurant is going to be an issue. I mean, you have to be so careful. If they're cooking your food, and most restaurants do, I mean, there's some raw food restaurants, but there's not many. So when they cook their food, they're going to cook it in vegetable oil. That's what they're cooking it in, guaranteed, 100%, unless you tell them. I get so obsessive with this, and I rarely go out to eat, but if I go out with friends, and I typically, because I stop eating like 2:00 in the afternoon, 3:00, and most social meetings are in the evening, of course. So I usually go when I protect my friends. So I'm only going typically to these meetings with people I enjoy and want to be around with. So I protect them, and I tell them, listen, I'm a doctor. And I show my phone. I've got the local hospital on speed dial. If he gets or she gets any seed oil in this meal, we're going to have to call the hospital, the ambulance. And it's going to be a great embarrassment at your restaurant. You got to make an ambassador for the server to go back there in the kitchen and make sure the cook doesn't put any of the seed oils in there. So you got to tell them the story and get aligned with it, because otherwise you will wind up with seed oil in your food, guaranteed. You got to convince them that this is a serious allergy that is life-threatening. And while it's pushing the truth, it isn't technically an allergy. It is life-threatening. It is 100% life-shortening. You don't need that in your food or in your diet in any way, shape, or form. So that's a big story. Any sauce in a restaurant is going to be loaded with, and even the olive oil, especially at a restaurant, 80% of it is adulterated. 80%, and avocado oil too. They're adulterated. Yes, you can find some specialty shops that charge you an arm and a leg for these things, and that's fine. But even if you had the purest olive oil, 20% of olive oil is still LA. So you can have some, but I wouldn't have more than a tablespoon a day of olive oil. Because why have excess? Because the goal is to get this as low as possible. So I've been talking for a long time now because I'm just a bit passionate about this, because, my whole focus in practice was to always address the reason, the fundamental cause why a person is getting sick. So, and these are long-term plays. Removing seed oils from your diet is not going to make you better tomorrow or next week or next month. This is a multi-year play. This is probably your best strategy to give you another 5, 10, 20 years if you started early enough to get this out of your life, and so that you can have, not suffer the common degenerative diseases that so many of us have, because it's the seed oils that are contributing to excess heart attacks and cancers. Do you know 120 years ago, heart attacks was the rarest thing in the world. This is the largest cause of death today. There were only a few recorded cases in the history of the world with someone with a heart attack before 1900. That's it. They didn't exist.
Huh, I didn't know
People
that.
think most people don't know that. This is a new disease initiated most likely from these seed oils, along with cancer, along with macular degeneration, which is the most common cause of blindness, arthritis, diabetes, obesity. We have 43 to 45% of the entire country is obese. And that's not overweight, obese. And we're going to 50% by the end of this decade. So seed oils is one of the biggest reasons. It's not fructose. A lot of people are thinking it's fructose. Fructose doesn't help, but it's the seed oils that are a big issue. So I said a mouthful and then some, and let me get you a chance to ask your question.
Yeah, I had a lot of questions that I wanted to poke in there. And I remember you talking at the conference. You're like, I'm going to save or give you an extra 20 years of life. And then you told me seed oils and gave me a little bit of information about it, but I was like, I don't know what he's talking about. So I appreciate some of the context there. That's good to know. So we've covered kind of like oxidative stress. And at first we were talking about ozone therapy being a mitigator for oxidative stress, but you're saying, hey, we're filling up a bucket with holes in it by just doing ozone therapy for oxidative stress. Really, the foundational cause that we're looking at is the iron levels and the seed oils. And going back to the iron levels a little bit, because I want to get a little bit more information on that. I listened to Dr. Robert Thompson on it, who's great. I love him to death, but he does go way over my head. And he is very matter of fact. So, to me, that wasn't very, very practical. But he was saying that you can't accurately measure the iron in the body. And that's why he was looking at the ferritin levels.
It's complex. I mean, you could use ferritin is definitely a measure. It's sort of a generic way to assess it, but you need to look at a few other things like your total serum iron, your TIBC level, percent saturation, and something called transferrin. So you need all of those to get a really good marker, but we don't have the time to go into details for that now. But the end result is almost every adult male needs to be getting blood out of his body on a regular basis. That means, and the studies support this. You look at people who donate their blood, they live so much longer. So at least once a year, probably twice a year for most people. Now, donate blood you're going to donate a pint. That's 16 ounces. That's a lot of blood to lose, and it's definitely going to impact especially if you're exercising vigorously. It's going to put a dent in your schedule. And you're going to probably feel a bit fatigued and tired too. So I like to do personally a little slower over and more frequently. That's why I donate 8 bloods of tube every month. So probably comes out to 2 pints a year, but you've got to have some way to lose your blood. And this is why many women are not as bad shape, because they have during their menstrual cycles, their menstruating years, most women are regularly losing that blood every month. So they tend not to have the problem until they go menopausal. But some people, but you got to measure it. So a simple measure is your ferritin, unless you're under high oxidative stress with a lot of inflammation going on, which happens, especially when you're acute infection. But if you don't have that, anything over in triple digits is a problem, but the higher it is, the worse it is. When I diagnosed my dad 30 years ago, his was like over 1,000. So it's really uncommon to see someone over 300. But the higher it is, the worse it is. So if you have a 300, 400, 500, or even higher, then you got to be donated as frequently as they will let you. So most blood phlebotomy centers won't allow you to donate. They do a pre-test to see what your hemoglobin level is. If it's too low, they won't let you donate. So you just keep on going back until they can donate. Because the sooner you get that iron out of your body, the better. It's actually much easier to remove the iron out of your body than those omega-6 fats, because they're embedded in your cell membranes. They have to come out by slow diffusion, and it just takes years and years to get them out. You can get your iron levels normalized within a year or two easily, not so much with the omega-6 fat.
Yeah, that's interesting. So we got the 2 primary forms of oxidative stress, and then in the context of ozone therapy, that's going upstream. So it's like, hey, I got rid of my seed oils, I'm dropping my iron levels.
Yeah.
What are some other strategies I can take to mitigate some of the issues I have going on and hopefully reduce some of the damage?
Well, I'll tell you one of the most intriguing antioxidants out there, and maybe one of the most profoundly effective ones, is melatonin. So I'm sure you've heard of it. And where do you think most of the melatonin in your body is produced?
I actually don't know that. I would assume the brain.
Yeah, well, it's pretty good. And I'm giving you a hard time, and you've had no formal medical or biological training. And I am enormously, since when I first met you, it was like 5-6 years ago at your dad's conference.
Yeah.
I was so impressed with you. I mean, you just really impressed me. You still do. So
I appreciate it.
that's why I like ribbing you occasionally, because I'm fond of you. It's not like I'm trying. I have something.
Yeah, I had an education on CPR. I did the EMT thing for a while. So, but that doesn't tell you anything about chronic disease or how.
No, it doesn't give you the base foundational science training you need. So anyway, if someone with science training, that almost everyone would say is produced in the pineal gland. And yes, it is produced in the pineal gland, but I just learned recently that only 5% of your body's production of melatonin is in the pineal, in the brain.
Okay.
95% is produced in your mitochondria. 95%.
And that's all through the body.
Yeah, well, almost every cell in your body has mitochondria. There's a few cells that don't, like your red blood cells. They're completely survive on anaerobic metabolism. But the mitochondria actually obviously take oxygen and produce energy far more efficiently, create like 18 times more energy than you can through anaerobic glycolysis. So that's the problem. And this is interesting because oxygen is a dual-edged sword, right? I mean, without it, we're dead. But the reason we exist is because we have oxygen, because we can generate so much more energy. We can be a multicellular organism and function efficiently, because prior to the introduction of the atmosphere, biological life was pretty primitive. The use of oxygen but it comes at a cost when you have oxygen. And that in the process of creating energy, it generates these reactive oxygen species, which can subsequently activate reactive nitrogen species, which is another form of oxidative stress, in some ways, and even worse than our reactive oxygen species. So most of this production of the reactive oxygen species in forms of oxidative stress is actually generated within the mitochondria. This is important. I know it's a long-winded answer to where it is, but wouldn't it make sense to have most effective antioxidant actually working against the reactive oxygen species, oxidative stress within the mitochondria where it needs it, right? So that's where it is. It's produced in the mitochondria. And guess, this is so cool. So cool. And I've always been a fan of sunlight for decades, at least 30 to 40 years. Right? I've been a massive advocate of sun exposure. But until last week, I didn't know one of the most foundational reasons. And traditionally, we've known that it's important to generate vitamin D. And I'm a big fan of vitamin D and have been for many, many years. But the problem is, I think is that it should be really, you should avoid taking vitamin D supplements if at all possible. It's the absolute last resort. You do not want to swallow vitamin D. I have not swallowed a vitamin D supplement for at least a dozen years. And my levels are extraordinary through the roof because I engage in sun exposure on most of my skin every day, which is what I'm going to do as soon as I sign off. I'm going to the beach and taking my walk and listening to my audiobook and just relaxing, walking on the beach and exposing my skin to the sun. So in addition to optimizing vitamin D's naturally, because there's a lot of controversy now about swallowing vitamin D and maybe causing more harm than good. I'm not sure, I haven't read the arguments deep enough to understand that, and it may be fabricated, I don't know, not fabricated, but misdirected. But nevertheless, I don't think anyone is going to disagree that getting your vitamin D from the sun is the best way to do it. No one would disagree with it. The practical reality is almost everyone, especially who lives in the United States, is not going to do that in the winter because they just can't. If you live in Florida or Hawaii or not even Southern California, because it's too darn cold there in the winter, or in the mountains, you could potentially do it. So anyway, but this is going back to the melatonin. Most of sunlight is actually near, mid, and far infrared radiation. Most of sunlight. It is not UVB. UVB is like what generates vitamin D is just like a few % of sunlight. So the vast majority of sunlight is infrared. And you would think if our ancestors were exposed to this for as long as humans have been on this planet, and I'm not going to say how long that is, because I don't know and not want to start any unnecessary controversy, but however long that is, we've been exposed to the sun. And you would think that historically we've required that exposure to optimize our health. And it turns out one of the primary mechanisms is that by exposing your skin to near infrared and far infrared, primarily near, you're going to increase your production of melatonin within your mitochondria, which was radically reduced the primary source of oxidative stress within the mitochondria. So, it may be that just taking a walk in the sun with minimal clothing on may be just as effective as ozone therapy, or more effective, and guess what the charge for that is, and guess what the side effects are. Especially if you're not eating seed oils, you're not going to get sun. Not only just eliminating seed oils reduce the risk of cancer, it almost eliminates the risk of sunburn, because that's why you get sunburn, because of seed oils. Yeah, most people don't know that. Yeah, it's what burns are the seed oils. That's what's burning.
There's going to be some level of it, regardless of how many you're eating.
Well, yes, especially if you're fair complexion, you don't have a lot of melanin in your skin. But the other thing you can do to reduce the risk of sunburn would be, and again, you always want to have sensible sun exposure. I'm not saying going out for 2 hours in the tropical sun. That's crazy. But you can take astaxanthin. Astaxanthin is one of my favorite. It's a carotenoid antioxidant. It's the most powerful antioxidant, or carotenoid antioxidant. It's a type of vitamin A. But it's really, really effective, especially against sun damage. So,
well, you're always bringing new things to the table. I didn't even know the vitamin D discussion was even up for debate. So,
it is.
Tie this together. I got a couple more questions for you, but kind of the takeaways I have from this conversation so far is we looked at oxidative stress, the key to aging, right? So, how do we mitigate that? We're looking at lowering iron, getting rid of seed oils, getting sunlight exposure. And then we have some of these interventions like ozone therapy, like the plasmapheresis, like the V cells, a lot of different things we can do. But for people listening, like you said, 10, 20, 30%, they might not have the ability to do EBU. In addition to that, I think there'll be 300 to 500 machines in the US probably in the next year and a half to 2 years.
That makes me so happy. I'm just almost jumping out of my skin when I hear that comment, because, literally there would have been the same number, which was like a handful, if I hadn't had that conversation with you and your family. So yeah, I'm just so excited because it is such a profoundly effective intervention. I'm such a huge fan of the EBU. I mean, I really am. But again, it's not the magic bullet. You've got to integrate it with these other strategies that makes it the whole deal. And they work profoundly effectively together, synergistically effective.
100%. And I've said that a lot. We often get lost in the sexiness of the therapy rather than the kind of the basic, get your sunlight, draw some blood off. But that's not good for influencers that are kind of promoting a lot of the education on this. They need to see an IV, hyperbaric oxygen chamber, what have you. But yeah, not necessarily the most sexy thing to draw some blood off, to get rid of seed oils, but probably the best thing you can do. But my question was about EBU therapy. So there's going to be some limitations on it, right? Some people it's going to be financial, that kind of thing. I know that you've done rectal insufflation, you do ozone therapy at home. Is that something that you advise for people to do?
I think it makes a lot of sense. I think it's somewhat, I think foolish might be too harsh a word, but unwise might be more accurate, of a strategy not to have this, integrate this into your personal health regimen. I'm a big fan of hydrogen peroxide, nebulized peroxide therapy, which would be a basic. There's just no reason you not to have a nebulizer in your house to administer hydrogen therapy. And if you don't know about that already, just go to BitChute, because all of our content has been taken down on our site. So bitchute.com, it's another platform alternative to YouTube, and you type in Mercola and nebulizer or peroxide, and you'll find all of my videos will come up, and it will tell you how to do the nebulizer, how to find the nebulizer and do that. Yeah. But the next step after that would be the ozone. I mean, I've seen amazing, literally life-saving results from the nebulized hydrogen peroxide, which I think is far more effective than the ivermectin and the hydroxychloroquine and many of the other therapies, especially if administered early. Now, if you get it a week late, it's going to be a problem. But day one, the moment you have a sniffle or something or cold, doesn't have to be COVID, it works really, really well. But what clearly more powerful, more effective would be the ozone therapy. It's a little more challenging, but I think it's a good strategy. I mean, the ozone generator, for rectal insufflation, I mean, ideally you should have an ozone cylinder. You could use an oxygen concentrator, but for the cost, it's probably going to be better to use an ozone cylinder and get the pure oxygen, put it up your butt. I was doing it regularly until I started doing EBU, and then having problems with my nurse getting back to me. I had to connect with her to do my EBU at home. So, because I've got the first prototype on the EBU machine, which is like great.
You did. So we'll have to swap you out once we get the fancy one that's all automated.
Yeah, it doesn't work. It's still, it doesn't matter. It's actually sitting right here. I could show the first. I want to keep it just for historic value to put in the museum. The first prototype.
It will take to make there, but it might be sometime. Well, Dr. Mercola, I appreciate your time. This has been a wonderful interview. Like I said, you've opened my mind. The vitamin D discussion, I didn't even know that was on the table. Now I do. So I'm going to do some more research. Yeah. Thank you for helping us to make informed decisions.
Well, you're welcome. It's a great pleasure to be with you, Micah. Thank you for everything you're doing, because you're doing a valuable service, and I really appreciate it.